Rector and Director, members of the faculty, I'm very pleased to be here today. I mean, it's been my wish, long wish to return to Istanbul, where I have the most wonderful memories. And of course, it's a particular delight to be sitting, or at least standing, in the steps, same steps where Suleiman the Magnificent stood so long ago. It's a historic building. But my talk is actually also fits into the program, I hope, but it's beyond the program because I'm talking about the future of the world. It's the only thing worth talking about nowadays, really, is the future of the world. But I'm talking about it from the particular point of view of technology and the impact technology will have on the future of the world. And my talk is going to be in 4 sections. One is, it's called 2 Stories of Technology. Then the second section is why Europe and not Asia. And the third is technology irreversible? And the fourth is apocalypse. So I hope I won't end on too gloomy a note. But 2 stories of technology. You see, it all started when I was writing my book. And I was writing a book on the human relationship with machines. And I thought, well, look, there's a story of technology and work. And this is the story we all hear. Machines are taking human jobs. What are humans going to do when machines take their work? Are they going to find other work? Are they going to become unemployed? What's going to happen? What's going to happen to the population and the people? So it's a big subject. Ever since the Luddites in the 19th century, these English weavers started smashing machines, there's been this debate. Are machines good for people or bad for people? Of course, it's been a debate about producers, but it's also involved consumers. So you could argue machines have been good for consumers, but not so good for producers. But still, this is a big debate, and it's going on. We don't know quite how to deal with it. Nowadays, we tend to think that it depends on how fast innovation comes. If it's too fast, then we can't cope with it. And how good or well people can be retrained, upskilled to what's called race with the machines. Race with the machines. If those 2 things can happen, in other words, if we can remove the frictions in the way of the introduction of machines, then the whole of the human race will continue to benefit, and a glorious future of enhanced creativity, leisure, consumption, entertainment, travel, beauty, nobility will be our fate. So that's the optimistic view. Anyway, now there's another story about machines which I think is quite interesting. And at first I really wasn't so aware of it, but it involves information technology. You see, the first story ends in a computer, really. You have a stone which you sharpen, and you go on and on and on, and in the end there's a robot, yes, a robot. The second story is about printing and the development of language, printing, and then telephone, television, and computer. Information technology is not exactly the same story as robotics. And I thought these 2 stories come together at about the time of the French Revolution, and I wanted to link them together in my book. Now, information technology, again, it has 2 views. There are 2 views you can take about it. One is it's wonderfully empowering. What we have with our internet is everyone has access to all the knowledge in the world. You just have to click and you get knowledge. Knowledge that no one could think about in the past. Knowledge only confined to a small elite of priests, scholars maybe, and now it's open to the world. So that's the optimistic view about information technology and basically electronic computer technology. But there's a pessimistic view. Am I going to fall off my stool? I mustn't move my body too much. So there's a pessimistic view as well. And that is that knowledge is a scarce resource. And not everyone can have it. And the more electrolyzed knowledge becomes, the more it's concentrated in a knowledge elite, which then controls everyone else. So you have the pessimistic view of all this is that a small group of people really control the knowledge economy, and everyone else has to more or less do what they like. Now, there was a model. There was a model for this, and it was by Jeremy Bentham in the early 19th century. He built a machine called the panopticon, and this machine was an ideal control system in which you had a central tower. This was built for a prison, by the way. You had a central tower, a light tower, which went round, and every people in the tower could see what was going on in all the cells round the center, but the people in the cells couldn't see anyone inside the central tower. So the principle of control is that only one side can see what the other side is doing. Now, that principle of control has become more and more sophisticated with the development of electronic technology. So you have CCTV cameras, you have the whole apparatus of what I call the omniscient eye that can see everything that's going around, but no one knows what's behind it. Now, we have an organization in England to safeguard civil liberties, which is called Big Brother Watch. You know where Big Brother comes from. Big Brother is George Orwell's 1984. So there you have a story or a debate. Is technology a democratic force to liberate people from toil, trouble, and arbitrary authority, or will it trap us in an iron cage of bondage? Are there yet any more shocks left in the technological locker, or is the human-machine relationship bound to end in tragedy? And that seems to me probably the most important thing worth talking about today. Now, the second part of my talk: why Europe and not Asia? What I've been telling is basically a Western story, isn't it? It's Western science and Western technology which was exported all over the world, and it's Western technology, Western science that threatens the world with Armageddon. Now, nothing indigenously was developed in the non-West which displayed the same vaulting ambition and capacity for destruction as Western European technology. Non-European civilizations both promised less and threatened less. Now, I'm going to try and very briefly give my view for why this was so, and I have to say I've got to be very careful, especially with this audience who know much more about these things probably than I do. But the question is, why did science and technology develop in this uniquely ambitious and also destructive form in Western civilizations, especially Northwestern civilization, and not anywhere else in the world. And is it now universal so that it's become simply global, the technological momentum? Or are there forces in other civilizations that can resist, that will resist, and will that resistance be liberating or will it be destructive? Now, these are big questions, and I think people are asking them. They're talking about them the whole time, and I don't pretend to have definitive answers to questions like this. But let me start with it anyway, the question. In his book on Islam, Montgomery Watt, he's an important historian, writes, Islamic systems of land tenure in combination with the Islamic law of inheritance, which led to the fragmentation of estates, and the practice of establishing the awqaf, or religious trusts controlled by lawyers, discouraged owners of land from themselves making improvements and inducing the cultivators to adopt superior methods. So his explanation is, in Europe, you developed a particular system of private ownership which encouraged technical innovation, but you did not have that system of private ownership in the non-European world. So it's ownership, private ownership, that is the base of innovation. And then you have the technological dynamic which Europe exported to the rest of the world. Now, of course, you know, to put it like this is, of course, maybe just, one mustn't assume that I'm saying this makes the West superior to Asia in any way. These are value systems completely. But there is still the point to be explained that despite the achievements of science, technology, huge achievements in science, mathematics, and other civilized arts, nevertheless, by the 18th century, it seemed that Europe raced ahead in science and technology, and the rest of the world just stood still. So why was this? I think a generalization, and that's the only one I want to venture, because I know it's a very, very difficult subject. The best generalization I can think of is this, that neither of the three great non-European civilizations, that is Islam, India, and China, experienced the secularization which happened in Europe in the Renaissance and culminated in the Enlightenment and the enthronement of science. None of the great civilizations had the process of secularization which was experienced in Europe. All aspects of their thinking and living remained enfolded in religion, religious belief. So you had a cultural tension between West and East, which lies at the heart of today's clash of civilizations, that term of Samuel Huntington's. Can non-European civilizations develop a sufficient soft power to become attractive alternatives to Western secularism? Or are attempts to develop alternative routes to the future bound to lead to apocalypse and violence and destruction? So that brings me to my third topic out of four, and that is our future irreversibly determined by technology? Is there any alternative to technology? Because, I mean, this is a grad school of technology. You believe you're committed to innovation and all the good things that innovation brings. But is there any alternative? Can one think of any alternative pathway to the future except the process on which you're embarked? And here my question is, what do we think about determinism as a philosophical idea? By technological determinism, I mean a path to the future in which society has adopted as its own a technological standard of judgment on all policy choices. The technological determinist claims that this is the situation we're in, and that therefore it's virtually inconceivable. Whoops. No, I knew that might happen. I'll stand up. That it's virtually inconceivable for governments and individuals to conceive of a non-technological future. You see, this is a very delicate balancing system. If you move too far this way, you come... What? No. I have some questions about this one too. I think in the end, in the end, my only secure situation is non-technological. That is my legs. That's where we started, and that's where this talk will finish. Now, the technological system, in other words, the claim is that it has become fully autonomous. The technological system determines our choices. Moreover, it's global. It's all over the world. In between, there are many intermediate positions. Now, I think the argument is very simple because, you know, some people might say this is absurd. Of course, it can't be true. And yet, whatever caused technology in the first place, we don't know what caused technology in the first place. Millions of years ago, and then a very, very slow development, and then a sudden acceleration in about 1750. Whatever caused it in the first place, now it's unstoppable. You can't stop it because it has created its own slipstream. We're all dependent on a technological way of living. And therefore, how can we possibly get off? We can't go back to bows and arrows. We can't go back to the Stone Ages. We can't go back to the Middle Ages. We're trapped, is that right? Now, however, let's unpick it a little bit. Technology comes in two forms. Determinism in two forms. Hard determinism and soft determinism. Hard determinism is, of course, really untenable. You can't say that we are anywhere close to a super intelligent, self-directing, self-replicating machine as the director of the universe. We're not there yet. So a bicycle, you know, is just a heap of metals, a heap of bits of metal without someone cycling it. And humans are they're still the cyclists. They're still the drivers of the machines, ultimately. So hard determinism, the idea that machines actually will run our future, is rubbish. But technology is more than just machines. Technology is the robots and the people, the organization of the robots, the people who direct the robots, the systems of which the robots are part and of which humans are part. So that is the system, though, that is in control. And there, I think, the answer is yes, probably yes. That we feel that the system of technology frames our choices. It gives us a frame of necessities in which we make our choices. And in that sense, soft determinism has a lot said for it. In other words, our civilizations are path dependent. And if they're path dependent, exit isn't possible. Catastrophe, though, can take the place of choice. We can exit through catastrophe. You know, I don't know whether you ever know, but it's worth reading. It's a small novel by E.M. Forster, written in 1906, called When the Machine Stops. And it's absolutely wonderful because there's already been an environmental catastrophe. So everyone's moved underground. They all live underground. The surface of the earth is virtually uninhabitable. And then they notice that suddenly the air is getting very foul, that the water turns brown, that the communications break down, the television doesn't work any longer. All these things he imagined in 1960, and gradually the machine stops working. It just stops working, so everyone dies. This is, you say, well, this can't possibly happen. And yet, you join up some of the dots, and then you get the philosopher William McGaskill writing today, from climate change to nuclear war, engineered pandemics, uncontrolled artificial intelligence, and other destructive technologies not yet foreseen, a worrying number of risks conspire to threaten the end of humanity. That's today. These challenges are all the fault of technology. Fruits of technology. Let's not say fault of technology. They're all the fruits of technology. So how do we imagine that technology can save us? Now, one way of thinking about our prospects in the next 50 years is in terms of Arnold Toynbee's challenge and response theory. I mean, Arnold Toynbee was a great philosopher of history. He wrote about 10 volumes of the study of history. And in it he said this: societies are confronted in the course of their lives by a succession of problems which each society has to solve for itself as best as it can. The emergence of each problem is a challenge to undergo an ordeal. That was his phrase, a challenge to undergo an ordeal, and through the series of ordeals, the societies progressively differentiate themselves from each other. Now, in failure to meet the challenge leads to the extinction of the society. And in Arnold Toynbee's study of history, there were 21 societies, he counts, that became extinct. These are human societies, not animal societies. So, are we going to be one of them? Challenges. You know, everyone's turned pessimistic. I don't know of any people who are optimistic about the future of the human race, except people selling technology. Or maybe developing technology. Everyone else is pretty pessimistic. 6 months after the dropping of the atomic bomb on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, atomic scientists of the Manhattan Project created a bulletin to warn of accelerating technological advances which threaten humanity. And you may know of it, they started a doomsday clock. The time of which is announced in January of each year. January of each year, they set the clock for the coming year. And they started the clock in 1947, ticking at 7 minutes. Now, I can't remember why they set it at 7 minutes. And then it's been ticking ever since. And now it's, I think, 100 seconds. So we're 100 seconds to countdown. Of course, when we get to 0, that's the end of the world. Now, these are all they run something called the Bulletin of Atomic Science. They're all the top physicists in the world. You can't dismiss them as cranks. And that clock was at 100 seconds, set at 100 seconds, before the war in Ukraine revived the possibility of a nuclear exchange. The apocalyptic mood of the scientists has its counterpart in fictions and films. I don't know how many films you see, whether you're film goers, whether you're science film fans, whether you see these films on YouTube. But the point is, all the films now are apocalyptic. All the science fiction films are apocalyptic. And For them, the apocalypse has already happened. It's not that we're headed towards apocalypse. These imaginative writers and filmmakers assume the apocalypse has happened, and therefore they imagine the world after the apocalypse. Today, you can say there's no hope. What is there after the apocalypse? Savagery. Because at one time, people look forward to, say, the apocalypse of capitalism. Capitalism would have its apocalypse. But beyond capitalism was socialism. And that was great. That was the view. Now, with the collapse of social communism, what is there beyond? And one critic, a Marxist critic called Mark Fisher, says it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. So, what are the challenges? Let's go quickly to Toynbee. What are the challenges? Threat to jobs and livelihoods. Okay, we've dealt with that. Second, weapons of mass destruction. We're not just talking about, the old atom bombs or hydrogen bombs or great big dirty bombs. We're talking about a lot of bombs, escalating set. As they say it, development of hypersonic glide vehicles, ballistic missile defenses, and weapon delivery system that can flexibly use either conventional or nuclear warheads may raise the probability of miscalculation in times of tension. Well, miscalculation. Who dropped that missile in Poland? Okay, who knows? But these sort of miscalculations are very, very, very possible. And you don't then go straight from conventional to dropping a hydrogen bomb on Istanbul. You go little by little upwards until suddenly, a whole world can be engulfed in nuclear exchanges. Third, security. Security has become a huge topic. It's all to do with the security of supply chains. And that security has been, of course, threatened by, it became obvious with COVID-19. You've now got also the spread of economic sanctions. And finally, you have the huge energy crisis created by the Ukraine war. All these supply routes on which globalization relied and which we look to improve continuously and create an international world, they're all being cut, interrupted. So what happens? You retreat backwards to more nationalistic forms of life. But more nationalistic forms of life, of course, also involve conflicts and antagonisms. And gradually you're moving back then into a world in which we start thinking of war as a more normal type of life than we've been accustomed to in the last 50 years. Then global pandemics, number 4. These have been largely explained by the transmission of germs from animals to humans on the model of plagues like the Black Death. The Black Death is the model of a pandemic, and we apply it to COVID-19 as well. Different germs, but the same principle. But there's a non-negligible chance that this pandemic was the result of laboratory experiments gone wrong. Like Frankenstein and Frankenstein's monster. So, fiction is brilliant at capturing scientific imagination or reality. One mustn't take it for gospel, but it's very, very suggestive. Fifth, and the whole list of environmental problems, global warming, exhaustion of natural resources, entropy. Now, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change in 2000, last year, it repeated, human influence has warmed the atmosphere, ocean, and land. human-induced climate change is already affecting many weather and climate extremes in every region across the globe. To preserve a livable climate, carbon dioxide and methane gas emissions must be reduced to zero by 2050. And that would limit global temperature increases to 1.5 centigrade between now and 2010, 2100. Well, you know, people have now been thinking about this. It's not that, you know, if we go beyond 1.5 centigrade, the whole world collapses. There are 6 or 7 scenarios of correlating increasing temperatures with increasingly extreme events. And we know that they've all been already been described and illustrated. So we have that as another challenge, and that's a pretty severe challenge, an increasing run of extreme events. And finally, population. All our environmental problems would become much easier to solve if there were fewer people in the world. But there are trends to fewer people in Europe. Of course, the birth rate has fallen below the replacement rate. But in the rest of the world, population still increases. The rise in global population has been dramatic. From 3.7 billion in 1960 to 70, that decade, to 7.6 billion today. It's already led to massive species extinction. Virtually the whole of future population growth will come from the poorest parts of the world. This means an extra 2 billion or so people requiring to be housed, clothed, employed. So there's a problem. There's a problem of population, and it seems to be insoluble. The dilemma is that economic growth simultaneously stabilizes the population and increases carbon emissions at the same time. It's immoral to enforce poverty, and it's become immoral to promote prosperity. So, you know, how do we respond? Well, there's politics, the classic sphere of human action. The future is incomplete. It's up to us to decide through politics how we respond to these challenges. Can politics choose a planet-friendly set of responses? Technologies. Well, certain things you can imagine politics dealing with, all right. I mean, I think politics, if it were just a question of the relationship between work and machines, I think politics would probably handle that. You know, as machines take over more work, you develop replacement incomes, people work less, you have upskilling, training, and all those sort of things. I think politics could deal with that, actually. But it's the combination of that with everything else that I think it makes it more difficult to think of political solutions to the challenges I've outlined. First, you know, the choices have become more extreme. One person wrote recently, how's politics to manage the migration of 3 billion people in the next 50, 70 years as more and more bits of the world become unlivable? 3 billion people. Yeah? There was a film made by Bill Nicholson called, what was it called? Anyway, the film shows hundreds of thousands of people from Africa trying to get into Europe, and it ends with a row of machine guns facing them. Yes, okay, 3 billion people on the move, is that something normal politics can deal with? I doubt it. Second, the other thing about politics now, and politics is no longer rooted in making things. See, politics as it developed, politics of the 18th, 19th, 20th century, say socialism versus capitalism. it was all rooted in making things. It was rooted in factors of production. There were the workers, there were the capitalists, it was all oversimplified, there were landlords. They were all, the politics came out of what they were doing. No, it doesn't. It comes out of something much more abstract. It comes out of financial operations. It comes out of expertise. It's almost as though it's become invisible, that there are no roots to the political system any longer. And therefore, we feel, many of us feel, that there's a largely anonymous technological scientific system that runs everything, and that politics is simply theatricals. It's a sort of theatrical show that doesn't mean anything. Politicians decide this, they say we're going to do this, we're going to do that, the voters have decided this, they've rejected that, and then it all happens as though, so what? So, we've got that sort of feeling, and I think there's something in it. I'm in the Parliament, so I can't quite accept all of that, but I do feel also some of it. And thirdly, the challenges we face are global, whereas politics is national. We haven't got a world government to deal with world challenges. What we've got are national governments. And when we have all these challenges with their antagonistic responses, as powerful nations struggle to gain or retain control over scarce resources, where are there any safe borders any longer? All the borders become porous. And so that's another thing. Now, so that's politics. So I come to my very last thought for you, which is escapism. There's a long, long tradition in human history of escapes. People have always been trying to escape from situations they regard as completely intolerable. Escapist literature goes back to the Bible. Our Bible, Noah's Ark, was a classic escape story. And so here we are. One person says, the flood cannot be turned back. This is someone writing today. The best we can do is to construct arks within which we can ride it out, and by God's grace make it across the dark sea of time to a future when we do find dry land again and can start the rebuilding, reseeding, and renewal of the earth. So here's the first, what I call escape to the moon. So the human body depends on the resources of our planet, finite resources, but what if technology could engineer the escape from the earth by creating super brains from electrical circuits? These digitized brains might escape not just from the limitations of the body, but from the limitations of our world, and establish colonies in the planetary light cone to be fed from its still unexhausted endowment of negentropy. You say, oh, this is all completely mad, but billions are being invested in it by people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Peter Thiel and Mark Zuckerberg. They're all endlessly pouring money into the idea of super intelligent transhumans. And the ideal is the separation of the brain from the body, sending brains into space to colonize space. They could be kept going, you see, by all the electricity, natural fossil fuels still stored in the planetary system, and therefore they could avoid any exhaustion on Earth and could keep intelligence, our intelligence, going for millions of years. Well, is this mad? Yes, of course it's mad. But, why is it mad? Second escape route may be labeled archaic utopianism. Is it archaic? Why is it archaic? It looks back to the past. It's a desire for a simpler life, without giving up all the fruits of technology. It may take the form of individual acts of renunciation of aspects of contemporary living, or the founding of communities pledged to a simple life, or something like that. And there's a whole cluster of beliefs, around the idea. I don't know whether you ever read the E.F. Schumacher's book, Small is Beautiful. That's a sort of kind of escape to archaism. It's the idea of reconnecting production and consumption through direct exchange, through much simpler technology, dispensing with financial intermediaries and the financial system. So small scale, very influenced by Buddhism, and I think is had some quite important influences. An interesting offshoot of archaic economics, I think, which rather interests me, is the escape into cash. I find that a very interesting phenomenon. Cash is hard to track and control. That's one reason why all governments are against cash. All banks are against cash. They're all trying to remove cash from circulation and make sure people only do electronically monitored transactions. Now, cash, however, is a form of escape. It's a way of transacting so that people don't know what you're doing. It's a form of privacy. So I'm interested in the escape into cash. And so the more transactions take place in untraceable currency, the more scope there is for creative deviance. Okay, well, now a third escape route is psychic. This doesn't involve a change of location or a change of activity, but it does involve a change of mind. It's a psychic escape, which was very popular in the 60s, this idea, through psychedelic drugs, orgiastic music, erotic frenzy. Now, all of that the hippies thought was new to their generation, but all societies have always offered these psychic escape routes. They've never been, I think the counterculture of the 1960s thought of them as alternative lifestyles, and they're still there as escape routes, but they're not actually offered as alternative today. They're actually a regulated recreational space our technical cultures offer to its populations. So I think it's regulated recreation. Where you can sort of have a moment of escape, then you go back to work and to all the things you have to do. So these are escape. And finally, a very important escape route, which is also popular, has always been popular in history, and that is escape to monasticism. The fall of the Roman Empire was the start of monasticism in Europe. It's also in many other cultures. Escape from the nastiness, if you like, or the oppression of life. And monasticism is a very prominent. It's very prominent in the literature. There are new monastic communities forming. So, my last thought is the human relationship with machines bound to end tragically. We seem to be sleepwalking into disaster, but then on the other hand, it only seems to be disaster that can waken us from sleepwalking. So we get caught in this trap. So the idea is to think of small disasters as wake-up calls. The economist Albert Hirschman had this wonderful idea of the optimal disaster. A disaster that's sufficient to wake us all up and get us thinking about what we're doing, but not so severe as to wipe out wipe us all out. So, but we can't engineer an optimal disaster, can we? I mean, either too much or too little. And anyway, you don't want to be in a position of asking the devil into your scenarios in order to create a situation in which you can become more aware of life. So we have to hope that the disasters will be small. They will happen. There will be more and more extreme events, but we must be ready to think about alternatives when they happen, and then use the disasters creatively. We've got to think now about what is likely to happen. Otherwise, we'll be left without any resources to deal with them when they come. Thank you.